Welcome to the Business of Business podcast. In this episode, Lewis talks to Eric Toledo, design director for big tech companies and lead singer of the band Quiet Hounds. Listen in for some lessons on time management as Eric discusses balancing life as a husband, father, and having a successful career. Enjoy.
Welcome, Eric. Thank you very much for joining me. What I wanted to do...
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Normally what I do is let a guest introduce themselves, but what I want to do is kind of give the listeners a bit of an idea of who you are, and then kind of lead into perhaps the most important questions. So you're the lead singer of the Quiet Hounds. And I could only get stats from Spotify. Amazon Music and iTunes don't kind of readily give this away, and maybe you could shed some light on this. But on Spotify, Quiet Hounds, you've got 1.8 million listens on Get Up. Mm-hmm. I calculated over 2 million listens overall. Mm-hmm. And as I say, that's just on Spotify alone. You're a family man, and you've had a pretty successful career in design as well, with a background in startups, Apple, MailChimp. So with all that in mind, my question is, and leading into why I contacted you, is how the hell do you manage all of this?
Well, thank you for the glowing intro, Lewis. When you initially reached out to me about balancing, work, band, and home life, it's just something that I've just been doing for a long time, probably 15 plus years since being in a band, early 2000s. This isn't going to sound poetic or artistic in any way, but surrounding yourself with the right people and being disciplined about where you spend your time seem to be the right formula for me.
Right.
You kind of have to be obsessive about effective time management. I'd say I'm pretty compulsive about writing out lists of things I want to accomplish, then ruthlessly prioritizing those things every day. Carving out the day for focused time on things that matter. Helps me stay fully sort of present in the moment and things that are before me. So, in the morning it's dedicated family time. I don't check my email. I don't read news. I'm with my family, making breakfast, having coffee, helping the kids get ready for school. Trying my best to be fully present.
Yeah.
As soon as they're out the door, I'm preparing for my day. So reevaluating all the things I want to accomplish, looking at my calendar, making sure I have like blocks of time to recharge and process, all the things that I'm chewing on at work. And then the sequence of my day is super important, making sure that sequence makes sense with all the meetings I have queued up, and the conversations I need to have. So, when I talk about prioritizing, I'm trimming the fat, like declining meetings that don't align with the rhythm and purpose of my day. And then, so all these sort of non-work related things that I want to accomplish get queued up into these windows of time, that aren't in my work day, So my weekends and evenings, for personal projects, time with the kids, time with my wife, and band things, evenings when I'm home are the same way, fully present with the family, no devices, no screens. Then after the kids go down, sort of reflecting on what I got done and what I want to accomplish for the next day. So for the band, it's those windows set us outside of work where I'll carve out time to meet with the guys or find solo time to capture ideas. If we're in pre-production, I'll be writing with the guys. If we're working on a new record, that's time in the studio. And then a whole host of things for the band, like coordinating show logistics, updating things on the site, queuing up promo art, sending out merch, the list goes on. But, it helps really to have a team behind me, these guys have been making music with since, early 2000s, some of them since I was in college, so, it helps to have folks that are in the same boat who can help keep a conversation going as we sort out upcoming events, needs, managing the overhead of being in a band. Our manager, Chris Thacker, is just a logistics whiz and keeps action items as well. Our drummer, Brad, is a project manager at Turner. And, my producer, Deke Spears, is just a kind of a slave driver. So you can imagine that things, are kept on rails for the Hounds. With this kind of dynamic, I don't have to be as hands-on every day, and just, I trust these guys, I trust that, when we delegate stuff that, my mates have things covered, so, so with all that, I can't stress enough, having, in reflecting on this, really the foundation of it is having a healthy enough marriage that values personal time, processing time and individuality. I mean, my wife Emily is super supportive, a truly music lover, which is why I married her in the first place.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Work otherwise, I mean, it just makes a world of difference. She runs her own yoga, health, and wellness brand, so she keeps me centered and sane. But having a partner who can be empathetic, a sounding board, plus honoring each other's respective craft goes a long way in finding that balance between home, marriage, work, and the band. On time management, there's this really cool duo out there called Time Dorks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jake Knapp.
I've not heard of them.
Yeah. So Jake Knapp is the author of the famed Sprint book, where he's teaching organizations how to ideate in a sort of consolidated fashion, time being of the essence. And John Duratsky, these two guys, they geek out on how to help optimize the little time we have each day to be effective humans in the world, and they've got a book out there called Make Time. It's a really good read. But it's all about prioritizing and cutting out unhealthy distractions like social media, unnecessary meetings and things like that.
Yeah. I guess that ties into what you were saying about planning your day, and as much saying yes as also saying no.
Absolutely.
And that, go ahead. No, I mean that I had a lot of questions around, because really what it comes down to is time management, as you say. For a lot of us, I mean, as you say, in college, as much as you're there getting an education, I wanted to be in a band. I'd auditioned for bands who were touring and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and for anybody who plays, hopefully they can relate to this. There's always this idea that there has to be a compromise. If you want to try and, let's say, make it in inverted commas, you kind of need to do a job that's going to allow you the flexibility to give you all that time to invest in the music, right?
Yeah.
Or you're carving out a career and your band is something on the side, and maybe you play at weddings and a few gigs here and there and practice in someone's garage once a week, and things never really tighten up, but there's always that kind of desire, I'd love it if we made it and that kind of thing. But for you, I guess this discipline is really what's helped you kind of master both sides, right? Or all three sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really about the people. I mean, that compromise, is certainly a thing if you're trying to do it all yourself, I mean, if you're you essentially would have to pick, I feel very fortunate in that I've met a group of creative people that, have the same sort of work challenges and balance challenges that I have, but, all very capable, talented individuals. And so in that, we don't have to compromise because we can all work together to arrive at, a meaningful outcome that we're all happy with.
Yeah. Have you, from what I understand, maybe there was a period where you were represented by a publisher, but from what I understand, you in simple terms, the band is self-published, right?
Yeah. We do all of our own writing. We own all the rights to our music. And then with that, I think the other surprising thing, given the numbers, is that you haven't gone on
extensive, at least US tours, let alone anything international outside the US.
Right.
You've from what I've seen, you've always kind of focused on gigs in the Atlanta area primarily, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that this is purely just because of the complexity of our dynamic. We're not, in our early 20s where we can jump in a van and just, go willy nilly up the East Coast. I think it was certainly a distinct decision that we made when we formed this project in 2011, that we weren't going to do what we did before,
Okay.
and we've done that. We've done the touring up the East Coast, up the Midwest, and dates on the West Coast, and it's really expensive. I mean, we without a lot of data, when we were doing it in 05 through 08, there weren't a lot of tools for us to use as an indie, so short of the Tom Petty, REM, just get in a van and kind of make your way around the world. We tried that, and it can be a lonely and expensive experience. So what we sought to do was really just make the music we wanted to make and see what could come out of that. And so we had a lot of supporters around our first release. It made its way around the blogosphere, which is really kind of shaped our foundation, our initial fan base. And with that, we've been like really selective about additional markets that we might want to go play. I'd say with our family dynamic being what it is now, that we're maybe a little bit more flexible now than we've been in the past year. So,
okay.
Really trying to expand on our tour dates this spring and through the summer of this year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. At any point, I mean, you talked, I guess early on you were trying to do the tours, and as you say, it was expensive. Did it ever get to a point where a label was kind of reaching out to you, and maybe things were getting towards going to the next level where you would be all in on this?
Yeah, we certainly had that moment in our career, especially as we sort of entered into the market, made our first foray with our first EP, Southern Charm, and our first LP, Megaphona, in 2012. We had folks entertaining us from Warner. We had a label fly us, Roadrunner, which is fly us up to New York. We got our first ever major label offer. And offers today are very different than they were back, early 90s. And, before that, I mean, labels, in order for them to really make a return on their investment, need basically full control of every aspect of your business, so they call these 360 deals. So we were offered a version of a 360 deal where, we didn't feel like we had control over how any of that budget was going to be spent. And really saw that, man, if this doesn't work, we basically are, and we're shelved, we're screwed, So being, pretty conservative decision makers, we felt like, the only thing that the label was really offering us was some reach. Granted, that's a hard thing to achieve on your own. But every other aspect of the business, from writing to production to promoting to our creative, I mean, we were doing all of it. So we weren't really convinced that what they were asking for was, or the partnership was sort of an equal footing partnership. So the types of partnerships that we seek are partnerships where we feel like these other brands or businesses can do what we can't do well. That's the type of help we look for. It's not that we're not looking for help. We certainly want to entertain conversations about like what a fruitful partnership might look like, and those just today are hard to come by. So
it's interesting that because I think listening to this, if I put myself in your shoes, there must be an element of we're offered a record label. Let's just do it. This is the path to glory and fame and riches, and to have and I can imagine the deal was probably fairly representative of most deals that are offered. So I guess that speaks to some intelligence to turn around and say, in logically this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and we had been in publishing deals where we've been offered a big chunk of cash and had to manage that ourselves, and in some way sort of squandered that on not very smart touring. And so we've had friends that have been in 360 deals and been engaged with major labels that we've seen how some of those careers have sort of played out, and for us as working members of society, and still being able to create music that we know and love, like it was sort of you have to ask yourself what success really looks like, and we had a manager back in the day go, guys, like, so you want to be making your own music, you want to be putting out records that you love, you want to be surviving. Well, aren't you already doing that? So we're like, okay, well, all right, well, so it's a good question, so.
What is your definition of success, I suppose?
That's right. Right.
Yeah, because coming back to the control side, you guys, I've been looking at YouTube and some of the history in terms of how you've toured. You've done things like sort of like I don't know how to describe them, like almost like dinner with the band. So people are having dinner while you guys are playing, and then you're not regular, but your regular gigs in a not an arena, but in a music setting, right? So So you've obviously had a lot of control over how you put the music out to fans and so on.
Yeah, and those sort of well, we like to think of them as experiences, right? So for our audience, it was less about, hey, let's just listen to the music, and it was more about like, okay, how do we create an environment where it's best consumed, and for us initially, it was not about showing up to a traditional venue and just selling tickets and having people come listen to the music. It was about what type of unique space can we craft in order to really help the music shine, so we would seek out untraditional venues like warehouses, and or restaurants, or someone's home, like these intimate settings that feel like a departure, and in that, it's not your plug and play, it's not something that you can easily recreate, so those things have been few and far between. We've done things at historical sites. We've done things, like I said, in warehouses where we have to basically set everything up soup to nuts, like production, where people are going to go to the bathroom, how they're going to get food, all that stuff, but those things make for meaningful experiences that people still talk about today. So like, we're really proud of those things. So.
Yeah. You mentioned the historical sites there, and I think in some of the earlier music, was there some kind of storytelling around, is it the Civil War?
Yeah, I think we in crafting the persona for Quiet Hounds, especially in the early days, we had some advisors that were just big supporters of us even before the Quiet Hounds. Kind of point us at all the history that's basically sitting in our backyard. Atlanta and the Southeast is just rich with Civil War history, and it just became like this, sort of fertile ground for us to like explore what the persona for the Hounds could be, and we've since sort of departed from a lot of those themes, but like it was just a great sort of entry point for the Hounds, and and also a conversation with our audience who lived in Atlanta about like, hey, these are things that you have access to, and so that's where some of the initial storytelling came from, and so things like events at the Swan House, our Beacon Sun video shoot at Andersonville Prison, which is just a short jog from here, and it's all over. So
and a great way of doing content marketing, I suppose. Tying the music in with the local area.
Yeah, and like these things are sort of seeds and catalysts that start a conversation that can sort of spawn into sort of broader collections of compositions. It's a source of inspiration. So and those things change. Like the sources change. So
and on the coming back to creativity, clearly you're someone I would say perhaps high output. You have effective time management skills, but how do you find all of that with the kind of space needed to write songs? Because that's not something you can necessarily, and maybe you can sit down and say, right, for the next hour I'm going to write the next record. So
totally, yeah.
So how does that kind of work? Because ultimately you could be a tight band, play well together, get on well together, but without the story, without the the lyrics and the creativity. So how do you kind of deal with that given time management?
Yeah, like you said, it's not like you can say, oh, on a Tuesday evening I'm going to carve out some time to write, and voila, I have a song. It totally doesn't work that way. It's when I hear things or I feel like I have something to say, there's typically some kind of prompt from the world,
Right.
That prompt can come from, something that I maybe, that may be eating at me, or something I might read or hear that might strike me as somewhat profound, maybe it's a chord progression or rough mix the band might send me, I'd say that, you just have to be listening, you have to be listening and thinking about all this material that you process in your day as, inputs into the songwriting process, and if you're available to capture them as such, then, that's kind of how you need to be looking at the world, I capture a lot of things on my phone, I'm like sitting in traffic, or I have a spare moment in the morning or evening. My voice memos is like a dumpster of like rough melodies, I write my journal almost every day, and as you go, you'll find like the most mundane thoughts in it, definitely a list or two, and a lot of observation about things that might be ailing me spiritually, explorations and how I might articulate these sort of complex emotions, But all these things, like I said, are like seeds, like catalysts that kick off the process, and once there's a sort of foundational idea, a chord progression or a basic melody, a thing to be said, we as a band start to like deconstruct, rebuild, build, iterate, as necessary, until we're all like really happy with the composition,
Yeah. You you're touching on some key kind of not pain points for me, but Harvard. I think it was Harvard. They did a study of their students. And they asked the question about who was journaling and who was writing down their objectives and that kind of thing. Essentially, what you've been talking about. And then they came back to those same students, I don't know, 10 years later or whatever. And what they found is that 90% of the students that had been journaling and writing had actually achieved the things that they had set out to do when they were first interviewed. And I think it was 80 or 90% of those who hadn't. So it's very clear that intention really is an effective management skill. It's something I've really got to apply myself to, certainly journaling and that kind of thing, because
I mean, I think it's, there's so much, and this is, kind of part of time management. There's so many things that tug and pull at us as, as human beings, like emotionally, like there's family and there's, our colleagues and peers and friends and network,
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, the journal is the place to kind of start to organize those things, and start to really kind of figure out where you want to apply energy, because there's a million things that you could apply your energy towards.
That's right. Yeah.
And really we only get super effective when we go deep in any one area. So it's just like, you have to be super selective. So, and like the things that we process are so complex, man. I mean, like, I may stew on an idea for months and weeks. And it can be something super simple, and maybe it's just a collection of words that sort of embody that thing. But you may go really wide just trying to articulate it, with the limited vocabulary that you have. And maybe you are having a conversation, or you hear something and it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been trying to say for the past month. And it's, and that translates so well to songwriting, because in songwriting there's so much constraint. There's like, you only have a few minutes, or maybe you have a phrase or a bar. It has to have like a rhythmic kind of pattern in order for it to fit, so you can't be, spewing out a novel. You have to be extremely concise with what you're trying to say, and in that is the art.
And we talked a lot about time management and creativity here. In your in your employment career, let's say, I don't want to say that anything that you've done is a side gig, because I think that's I don't think that does it justice. So if I use any of that phrasing, I apologize. But when you go from, maybe doing a gig at the weekend, family, spending time with the band, Monday morning you walk into a job. I know you have a creative career as well, but what is that like, going from that freedom that you have to being an employee on Monday morning? Is that a hard transition for you?
No, it's like, it's so necessary.
Really?
I mean, I think for me, my lifestyle has been about balance, right? And the type of like problems and things that I pursue, the things that inspire me, I think in my position at work, as a creative leader, I can't be prescriptive about, how I want to see things play out in the world, at work, right? I mean, being a leader is all about like giving people the space to operate and giving them just the right amount of guidance to unblock them, keep them moving. But, so I have to play that out in other places, and those other places are my songwriting, my creative time with my band, so I have that as a mechanism to be in full creative mode and in full sort of a control of my destiny there, whereas I enter a very large sort of complex organization like Apple or even MailChimp, I can't be bringing that same mindset into that environment.
Looking back at Apple, you joined Apple as a result of an acquisition, is that right? So
That's correct.
You've managed to do something that a lot of people aspire to as well, which is to be part of a startup that gets acquired. So you're checking off a lot of bucket list boxes here. So can you talk a little bit about that process, and also how that brought you over to California, but you were still with the band. So what was that period of time like?
Oh man, it was so amazing. I mean, this was maybe 2011-ish. I'd met a group of technologists running an agency on the West Coast out of Santa Monica. The chief technology officer behind all of it, Tristan Kosminka up in Edmonton, Canada, just became really a mentor for me,
Right.
And just the pace at which they operated was funny enough a lot like being in a band. Super scrappy. You're trying to like piece together what an experience might look like or feel like. You're working with very talented people that have similar mindsets and just want to get the job done. I would say, from that time, 2011 through 2014, by the time we were acquired, was like some of my most productive years as a designer.
Right. Yeah.
Because there was so much elbow room, so much surface area to cover. So many parts of the business that had to be defined. So I really learned about what truly effective collaboration could look like as a small unit. And acquisition was, when your head's down in it, was not ever really, I'm sure for the founders and the leaders of the organization, it was top of mind. But for me, it was just about like, camaraderie and collaboration with the engineering teams, and the other designers that were a part of it, and really honing in my ability to communicate an idea, seeing that mature in our user base and being able to be a part of how the experience evolved was awesome. And playing a huge role in that. And then the acquisition, from my standpoint as a contributor, kind of took me by surprise. I was one of very few designers working on the product, and would fly out to Santa Monica every now and then. And there was just a big announcement that kind of, we were acquired by a larger company called Bursley, right when I started full time with Test Flight, and I believe it was 2012.
Okay.
Was a contractor before that. And then we're in a conference room, and our CEO Ben Satterfield was like, "Okay, well, we have some news," and there were some rumblings of some presentation that was supposed to happen, and there was this sort of presentation about the journey of Test Flight being acquired by Bursley, and then at the end of it, like announcement that we were being acquired by Apple, and everybody in the room was just kind of like, "Wait, what?" And so I'm texting my wife back in Atlanta. I'm in Santa Monica, like, "Hey, do you want to move to Cupertino?" It was a magical time for everyone involved. And in that process, the mergers and acquisition team just being so on point about like the anxiety and the questions that we might have, and just being very available to answer all those things.
As you move, right?
As the acquisition was happening, as Apple would start to consume the resources. And then for me personally was just a really validating and flattering conversation with the executive teams about like where I wanted to spend my time, because I was in a position to either be part of the product team or part of the engineering team, or keep carrying on with design. So it was a really cool moment.
So if you're having those conversations, are you fairly technical as well? Have you on the development side?
Yeah, at the time, I pretty much I built out the front end framework for Test Flight. Ahead of being purchased by Bursley, I was I was the only front end engineer. So was filling both a product design gap and a front end engineering gap. But I have a very soft place in my heart for those hybrids, those people that live in between the tech space and the design space, and especially the ones that can operate fluidly between the two.
And then from there, back to Atlanta. And at that point, you joined MailChimp, was it at that point?
That's right. That's right. I had a longtime mentor, Aaron Walter, who I've just admired his work in the design space for many, many years. He stood up the design discipline at MailChimp,
right?
And reached out. And the end of 2015 about an opportunity to really help build out and stand up the R&D discipline at MailChimp. So.
Right.
So I was hired to do that, and it was he brought my family back home here to Atlanta, and we've got family in Georgia, so it was always the intention to come back.
Right. Yeah.
So he just made that easy for the family, and and that's how I made my way back to the East Coast.
Yeah, and with you, if we move on to talk more about design. The question I want to ask you really is, from your perspective, having been involved in design and particularly customer experience or the customer experience, what's your, having worked with the likes of Apple and MailChimp, what's your kind of view on where we are with it in technology companies? Is it, 2020, everybody's saying it's the year of customer experience. Are companies, from what you found and your peers and so on, are companies getting this right, or is there still a lot of pushback on the customer experience and design overall?
Yeah. Well, let me maybe start to answer this with what is CX? I mean,
we some know people that struggle with that, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's it's somewhat new in respect to older disciplines, but and I think it's just a different take on UX. So but we know that in popular articulations, it sort of entails a broad expanse of touch points, interactions with a brand across the entirety of a customer journey. That's most often sort of measured by lagging indicators like NPS, and through a support lens, which is pretty common. You'd be looking at churn rate and retention, response and handling time, and some measurement of satisfaction like CSAT, So where are we at with CX and design? I mean, my perspective is that CX is broad, and that design is one of many components to achieving good CX, and that measurement of success is different for every organization. I know you need a goal, you need a mission, you need data to help inform that mission, you need an intentional orchestration of events, and at the heart of it, you need solid UX. But because of the complexities at every organization, and the uniqueness of those complexities, the customer problems are unique. I'm not of the school of thought that you can kind of apply some out-of-the-box maturity framework to an organization and expect to see any sort of real results. So, not only are the business needs of each organization unique, the needs of a business at each stage of growth will have sort of discrete needs that need to be addressed in order to really effectively influence the overall quality of what customer experience is. So, for example, you may be in a place that doesn't really value experience and basic user needs mechanics. So, in that event, you're probably looking at some deep-seated change behavior, some real organizational transformation. Those types of things are much harder to measure and often point to fundamental UX ahead of any sort of advanced CX endeavors. At MailChimp, we have a sort of rich culture of focus on our customer needs, and recently created teams anchored around our highest impact segments. This is where the business sees the largest growth opportunity. So anchoring on a segment and creating cross-functional players whose mission is to increase market share in any one of those segments creates this really interesting dynamic, right for CX endeavors. And in that we have a KPI driving success, and we can ladder meaningful UX metrics into that. And these sort of become critical levers in the experience that move the needle on our highest level KPIs. So, if you take the time to do the math and understand how that's calculated, you can effectively isolate areas of the experience of highest impact to that equation. So through a design lens, I would say, we can contribute to that in a unique way, and embedding, service designers that can effectively stitch together an end-to-end experience strategy,
Yeah.
and highlighting these levers in the experience, working with stakeholders and facilitating hard conversations with critical partners and gatekeepers in the org that can really help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd say that if you're in a position to influence CX, you should start with, what business problems are you trying to address right now with CX? And do you know what success might look like when you get it right? And then how would you measure it?
Yeah. Yeah. And you've talked about segmentation and the idea of being in a bigger business, or an established business. But coming back to really, I guess, two areas that I see. One is a smaller company or a startup, and then also B2B. I certainly know that in B2B, there's less focus on UX and CX. But for any organization who's starting from what they feel like is a blank sheet of paper, what would be the do's and don'ts? Like, what are the things that companies do that work well or are working well? What are the things that you see that companies are doing that doesn't, that is a bad road to drive down?
Well, I think it's common for most organizations to kind of sort of come into being through either an engineering lens or a very sort of feature product business lens, and that's okay. That's good. These are drivers that sort of are catalysts for the business. I think if you're in a startup and you're trying to figure out where you want to invest your resources or where you should grow the organization, if you haven't already invested in user research or marketing insights, that is a great place to start. In that you start to not only understand the customers that are already using your product, but your potential customers not yet using your product. And the feedback loop needs to keep those customers in mind all the time. So MailChimp's success is really born out of that rich culture of understanding its customer needs. And balancing that with good gut and data around what an experience might look like for those customers. So yeah,
I think a lot of companies, and I'll say this for smaller companies, and I know MailChimp is technically business to business, but obviously for them, anybody who's looking to do branding campaigns, you could be a social media influencer up to a large S&P enterprise. But I think for a lot of, and speaking on behalf of kind of a lot of the companies that I've worked for, I think the struggle is that they don't even know what questions to ask. That's the issue. And as you say, when it's so engineering led, it's like that idea that you build it and they come. And that's where everything falls down, because if you got sales and revenue, that's fine. But I do feel, and maybe you agree on this, that these companies are missing out by not investing more in that. And I think part of it is just a lack of education as to what this whole subject area even is.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of standing up a practice, when you've an early stage sort of business, and then there's kind of how you sort of capitalize on design, as an organization sort of matures, right?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty common in more mature organizations for leaders to start to reference the company culture, when they're asked about design maturity and design's role in an organization.
Yeah.
And I think, we're in a place where, like you said, design is simply good practice. If you're not thinking about it, your competitors are going to eat you alive, So, now, whether you're effectively utilizing the power of design and the voice of your customer to differentiate your experience in the market and move the needle for the business, that's another question. Right?
Yeah.
With that question, I'd say that, design needs to be tied to the business. It needs to speak the language of the business, and it needs to speak strategy. So outside of just pointing to company culture, if I could be more pointed about the right environment that supports design and its effectiveness, I think it's about design strategic partnerships with the organization that matter. So the strategic sort of lifeblood depends on its relationship with marketing and its relationship with product management. And if either one of those aren't in good standing, you'll see a lot of good talent go to waste, and you'll see the customer experience suffer.
Yeah. You've touched on culture quite a bit there, or brought it up. On LinkedIn, you describe yourself as a servant leader. I think I have an idea of what that's about. I follow Simon Sinek. But could you talk about your context, and maybe for anybody listening who doesn't know what that means, where you kind of stand with that?
Yeah, you mentioned Simon Sinek. I mean, great resource for reading about servant leadership. He wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last, and I highly recommend this for anybody who wants to be a kick-ass boss. Servant leadership, is exactly what it sounds like it should be, leading a team through the lens of support. So through that lens, it really becomes less about what I can do and more about what my teams are capable of doing, and what they need to be successful designers and leaders in the organization. I've mentioned creating space for folks to operate, offering the right amount of guidance to help them block and move things along. It's a lot of listening, a lot of asking the right questions, leading with curiosity to invoke thought. If you're hiring the right people, you're helping them expand their thinking. So that might mean one day I'm presenting a framework or proposal for a new initiative. And the next day I'm printing out a bunch of journey maps after hours because my team's in Brooklyn and can't get access to the printers in Atlanta, for an executive meeting for the next day. This is totally a theoretical situation. So in those examples, there's an ebb and flow, and when you might lead from the front versus leading from the back. I would say personally, my default position is to lead more from the back. And when we're, standing up something new or trying to address a hard problem, I'll typically shift to the front, especially if I see my team struggling, but as I see members of my team really stepping up and driving the conversation, I'll shift quietly back to my default position. So this is how I think about sort of growing leaders and nurturing autonomy. I had a mentor tell me, every year you should try to be giving up part of your job, and in that mindset, I essentially work to make myself somewhat disposable, when you're sort of elevating others, empowering other designers and leaders, teaching them to elevate the craft of design, building partnerships and broadening their sphere of influence. You're essentially helping them stand on their own 2 feet. And then, in some cases, in a lot of cases, I'm standing things up and handing them over, so I've done this throughout my career, giving up a lot of the operational aspects of running my team as the management team has grown. In 2017, handed over design ops to a very talented colleague, Jackie Frey, who took it to a level I would have never imagined. And in 2018, handed off product design over to Ryan West, who scaled it to the next level and matured the discipline in so many magical ways. And as of 2 weeks ago, handed the CX design discipline over to Melanie Kovic, wonderful design leader in the CX space who came to MailChimp from Delta just recently. So really proud of what that team's accomplished and how much it's grown, and look forward to seeing what they'll do here in 2020 and beyond.
Now you talk about something which, if people aren't familiar with this train of thought, you mentioned they're giving away responsibility, which for a lot of managers, directors, people who are have a leadership title is at odds with what they expect to get out of the job, which is I've got to this point after working at it. I need to keep hold of it. This is my castle. I'm going to build a moat around it.
Yeah.
And so what you're essentially saying is that really, and I might be quoting Simon here to some degree, I think probably to total degree, which is the idea as a leader, you're really there. I mean, the definition of a leader is someone who has followers, not through entitlement, but somebody who has gained followers, and through that is really the role is to empower other people to do well, right? I think that's what you're getting at.
That's right, and trust that the people that you hire to do a job are going to actually do that job.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. He in Leaders Eat Last, he talks about the dynamic of effective units like the Marines. Like why is it they're so effective? How is it they can go into these like dangerous environments and come out successul? You know, because they trust each other. They trust that each one of them would die for each other. And that their competitors, if they don't, the people that are against them will kill them. In an organizational environment, the people out there are competitors, right? And so, the last thing we want to be doing is like bickering and sorting out our internals. We want to be looking out there and figuring out like what we can be doing to move the needle for the business. So Simon's assertion is that, hey, we need to build that type of trust where I trust that you're going to get your job done, right?
Yeah.
And I trust that I can be very candid with you about feedback, right? And not take offense to it, right? So, and this is part of the job.
Yeah. I wanted to touch a little bit on design here in 2020. I know we're coming towards the end here. I was looking at Behance in preparation for this, and if people aren't familiar, that's sort of Adobe's, I guess, social media platform where you can go and share your Photoshop images and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about design trends for 2020, and one thing that kind of struck me was, and I guess rightly so, is how much more things like 3D, video, animation, these more technical aspects of design are coming in. Some people say that they're already in, but I think with the way that technology is allowing us to have memory eating media now, that we're able to have these things. How is that presenting a challenge in hiring in design? Because obviously now you've got a different skill set around, people who are good with video, people who are animators, right?
Yeah.
Moving away from traditional, let's say art into more of the visual, which is more resource intensive and arguably requires a different skill set. So is that something you're seeing?
I don't really see that as a challenge. I kind of see that as just the evolving nature of design.
Yeah.
I think there has always been and will always be specialties within the broad expanse of what design can encompass. Now, depending on the needs of the business, you may get to a scale where you need motion designers. You may get to a scale where you need photographers or people that just specialize in service design or content strategy, right? And these are things I've certainly encountered in growing and maturing a design org, but it really should all point back to like what the business is trying to accomplish, where are the challenges and where are the skills gaps, and in assessing the skills gaps, you have to go, okay, well, would the business benefit by really doubling down on this specialty, and so, I don't look at design trends and go, okay, we need to have that, right? I have conversations with my peers about like what they're trying to accomplish, and then I go, okay, well, do we have that skill or not, and in that, maybe a pitch for a budget to actually like expand in that capability.
So on the flip side, as a mentor to someone perhaps in coming out of high school, and they want to get into design, what would you tell them? Where would you tell them to kind of lean into now?
Oh man, coming out of high school, Yeah, for
Well, I
those
guess
that are,
at that point, is
that's
say,
fine.
I want to do design. Where would you kind of, what direction would you tell them to kind of go into to kind of, future proof?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I see so many designers coming at the profession from so many different backgrounds.
Right.
I've hired people from industrial design, people from out of physics, people like in journalism, and all of it is valuable because it teaches critical thinking, right? And really, in design, you are effectively problem solving with all types of different tools. The technology changes, so I don't evaluate people on kind of what type of technical tools that they use.
Right. Okay.
I look at how they look at the world, right, and how they process things and how they articulate things, right.
Yeah.
So these are all sort of are and everyone is unique, right? So I would say for people looking to get into design, the practice of creating, and the practice of iterating on a thing, will teach you not to be so tied to your ideas, because what you will learn, and especially in a corporate environment, is that your ideas aren't always the right ideas, and you have to be, and in the collaborative space of making music, it's the same way. I mean, you try things, and you can't be tied to the way that you hear things. So I would say for anybody wanting to start out in their career as a designer, is to whether it be woodworking or whether it be poetry or whether it be whatever the medium is, practice doing it a lot. Practice like iterating and capture your creative process. So one of the sort of core components in sort of evaluating designers is that you have to have a portfolio. So this is probably the most tactical thing that you could work on as a budding designer, is that, like, okay, it may be a problem space that you see out in the world. Maybe you feel like there's an app that could be really improved. Maybe you feel like there's a problem that isn't being addressed in the world. Make that like a pet project. See if you can redesign something. See if you can come up with a way to alleviate a pain point in the world. And it doesn't have to be like a fully fleshed out prototype or anything like that. It can simply be just the articulation of capturing it, and documenting your process and how you process that problem. And those things are meaningful conversations when you're even for a junior designer, like really evaluating what kind of potential this person has ahead of them.
You raised some good points there, and I appreciate I've kept you up to our time. I just want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
And I could talk about all of this stuff all day long. One of the struggles I think for creatives, and it's something that I struggle with, is giving away your work to the world. Is putting it out there. Mm-hmm. What is there any tips, or is there a discipline that you live by? Where is it time? Do you say, right, this record or this piece of work has got to be done in the next 2 months? I don't know, whatever, and then it goes out regardless, and then you work to that deadline. How do you, as for me, I'm like, this image, this paper, this piece of code, whatever it might be, I could just keep improving on. How do you deal with that? Standing on the verge of the abyss, ready to press the button, and what advice would you kind of give people struggling with that?
Oh man, there's a quote. I'm trying to remember this quote, and I'm going to butcher this.
That's fine.
It's like, do not let perfection be the evil of good. Something like that. But I mean, basically what it's getting at is like, you can delay your process and output for eternity if you wanted to. I've seen songwriters do this. I've seen my own designers do this. Like, it has to be absolutely perfect before I even share it with anybody. I think that is a disservice. That is, a big part of just being present as a creative in the world is putting things out there. If you struggle with this, read Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. It is probably helped me the most in terms of just being a speaker, a person of visibility in the design organization. Where for a long time I would approach the things I would say to the team like a song. Right. And there's a great quote by Maya Angelou that says, like, people aren't going to remember what you said, they're not going to remember what you did, but they're definitely going to remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And I think we as creators just need to remember that, like, it's not about where the pixels go. It's not about, like, it being this ultimate sort of piece of perfection that kind of caps your career, because ideally, if you think about your career, you will do this many, many times, right?
Yeah.
And you will do it so many times that it becomes, in sort of performance speak, less about the execution and more about the conversation, right? So when we rehearse for the band, we rehearse so that I don't have to think about the mechanics of, like, what chord goes where, or what word goes where. I'm thinking more about how I'm connecting with the audience, right?
Yeah.
And the more you do it, you start to really hone in on that. And for creatives, a big part of the process is feedback. Is like how people respond to things. So how can you get feedback if you're not putting it out into the world?
Yeah.
And from Brené's perspective, it's just like putting things out into the world. It requires a lot of courage.
Yeah.
And you can't be courageous if you're not putting it out there in the world. So just put it out there. Because something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Well, Eric, it has been a real pleasure.
Oh man, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I found you guys when I was either moving or I first moved to the States, and I found Night Parade. My 9-year-old loves dancing around the living room to Emperors on full blast.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah, she absolutely loves it. I told her I was talking to you. She's like, wow, she got a little bit starstruck. I said,
That's so great. Well, tell her I said hello.
Yeah, I will. And I think Calling All Gamma Rays is my absolute go-to summertime song. So,
that's great.
Without sounding too much like a fanboy, again, it was very interesting to find you living this kind of life. As I say, for a lot of us who consider this, we think, well, you compromise on the job or you can't compromise on the creativity. So I hope to anyone who's listening who's struggled with that, I hope that it helps in some way. But people can find you quiethounds.com, usual social media channels. I know you're on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're on Spotify, Apple Music.
You played. Here we are with March 6th. You played a gig at the last weekend. Anything else coming up? Any plans to do any shows?
Yeah. So we do have some dates in shaping up for Nashville and Charlotte here this summer. So keep a lookout for those. Those are conversations that are starting to solidify. But spring and summer dates. Check out quiethounds.com to keep in the loop as those things evolve.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. Yeah, I've kept you over, but as I say, we could talk all day. But yeah, thanks again, and I'll continue putting out this great music.
Great, thanks so much, Lewis. Appreciate the time.